Hi, everybody. We couldn't ask for a better panel before us because I think it really leads a lot of things that we wanted to set up before we get to what we're going to talk about.
Thank you.
My name is Ron Devari. I'm ex-head of structural products at BlackRock
Thank you so much.
and a founder of New Oak. New Oak was created to provide transparency to illiquid assets, what brought the world near to its knees in 2008. We still haven't dabbled in blockchain, but we definitely are getting to try to figure out how it would really add to the liquidity and transparency in the market. So with that, I want to have the rest of the panel to introduce themselves, and then we go right into it. Today is about how do we get institutions to get comfortable to come into the market. If the market doesn't become institutionalized, you might as well forget it. And we'll get to that. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah. My name is Sam Ikkurty. I manage a crypto hedge fund. It's called Ikkurty Capital. I have been a technologist. I've been working as a software engineer for almost 18 years of my life. I've been a programmer, worked with a lot of Fortune 500 companies. I've been an early investor in Bitcoin when its price was around $100, I think, in 2013. Right now, we run a crypto fund. We've been doing really well. We returned about 67% to our investors when Bitcoin price has dropped by 50% in the last 2 years. That's about it from my side.
Just have a little bit speak louder. They cannot hear you.
Okay.
Sure. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
So I'm Kayvan Sadeghi. I'm a partner at Schiff Harden. So you get another lawyer. I think I just wandered onto the wrong panel here somehow. A lot of my friends in the space were on earlier panels. I can't get away from the lawyers no matter where you go in this space. I've been doing things in the blockchain space since late 2016. My practice focuses on litigation investigations, dealing with the SEC, what to do when they come calling, how to fight back against them and other government agencies. I usually show up when things start to go pretty far wrong. So I started my career dealing with the aftermath of WorldCom and Enron, for many of you who remember that saga. I then represented a lot of mortgage originators and servicers when it was a subprime crisis before it became a financial crisis. Then represented the rating agencies in the aftermath of the financial crisis, dealing with essentially everyone on earth, blaming them for causing worldwide financial collapse, and found my way into this space. It really started I guess I started in this space late 2016, working on a project for a Fortune 50 client on an enterprise blockchain application where they had regulatory questions. So that's when I realized this wasn't just hobbyists in their basement. This was going to start impacting real companies and involving real legal work. So that's what I do in the space, and we can go from there.
And definitely, Kayvan and I actually have worked together on some of the litigation side, me acting as an expert witness, and really it's a pleasure to work with him. One of the few lawyers that can actually lead you rather than follow you. But let me give you a couple of other things as a background. As was pointed out, there were a lot of, when you get into institutional asset management, a lot of flaws really showed up during the credit crisis.
Only part that everybody keeps talking about, this regulatory uncertainty, really the crux of it is, how do you go from point A to point B? If we know the beginning was a securities offering, if you do anything with a token at the beginning as a capital raise, and you know that it's going to function on the network in a way that's just a commodity, how do you get from one to the other? And we hear terms like sufficiently decentralized talked about earlier, and that's not a clear statement. The Telegram hearing that happened yesterday before Judge Castell downtown was really focused on what is Telegram's role going to be after launch of the Ton blockchain. Like that, it's clear that Telegram will still have some participation, some role in the project. They won't have the same sort of control. They're not going to have contractual privity with subsequent token holder, so there isn't a bundle of rights that goes with it. Is that enough to make it no longer a security? How do you move from A to B? And that's where that's a pretty narrow question, and that's really where the uncertainty is. And we hear a lot about it, but for most of what you're talking about for an investor, that isn't really at play.
And also, I think the access to the space through professional asset managers should solve the problem, because many people, I think, even for some of the institutions, they need to have a very specialized group to be able to value or look at, the investability of these. Even when you go to STOs, it's no different than when you invest in a private company. Any idea that this damn thing is going to trade is probably wishful thinking for now. Yes, I do have some questions actually from Kayvan. We heard about a Reg D offering in the U.S. combined with a STO offering abroad. Does that create an issue? Or is that a problem because Reg D may get, private investments, private information in the, your shareholders, if you will, STO holders may not get the same information provided to them?
So there are ways to do the sort of Reg D in the U.S. and Reg S, as it's called, for the foreign purchasers. And I think, as an earlier panelist said, there are ways that the things issued under Reg S can end up flowing back into the U.S. So that there are mechanisms. That's something that has to be treated carefully. But I think the question is sort of how it converts and why you would want to go through a structure like that. I think a lot of people are saying just avoid the U.S. Well, the same problem with just avoid the U.S. is I think the same problem with why do a security token at all. I mean, if you're trying to do a token, or if you're an investor, either side, you're chasing liquidity. I mean, liquidity is king. If you have a market that has enough volume and enough liquidity, that's where both the issuers and the investors want to be. And right now, the U.S. securities market has a lot of liquidity. So people talk about, we'll just leave the U.S., but we hear from a lot of projects who say, well, we don't really want to not have access to U.S. investors. I mean, that's not, at the end of the day, everybody wants to try to get back to access to the U.S. investors if they have that option. It's only if you think you're precluded from that for some reason that you would choose to actively carve out the U.S. investment market, and I think it's the same problem, with a lot of these things. You don't want to avoid that liquidity, and right now security tokens don't necessarily have it. The only other thing I'd raise is why do a security token structure in the first place? Why is that better than conventional equity? I mean, we've seen a lot of companies as they go public trying to clean up their cap table, and usually you want to have a small group of sophisticated investors who have skin in the game and can help you. They have connections. They can be advisors. They actually help the company move along. The last thing you need is 1,000 small investors who put in $1,000 each, and now they think because they were your investor, they have the right to call you every day. And that's just any startup's worst nightmare. I mean, you want investors who understand their role and can actually be helpful and not just get in your way. So the question is, to me, is why is it beneficial to have a broadly dispersed investor base? Like, why would you want that instead? And there are certain circumstances, and I think we see some around social media networks and other places where adoption by a broad group of people will drive the value of the underlying asset. So if you get the broad group of people who will eventually use whatever your service or product is to be owners and feel like they have an ownership stake, that will drive their adoption, and they're essentially selling your product or service to their friends and will help create the network effect that you need for your product to take off. If you have a product that is relying on that sort of mass adoption or network effect, then it makes a lot of sense to seek a distributed ownership where everybody who you want to incentivize to promote your product has skin in the game. And then I think it makes sense. But for other business models, I'm not sure that the business case is there.
I think, as you all highlighted, if you're a real company and you have access to your Reg D capital, obviously, it's a very difficult, the process for itself. We happen to have a broker-dealer, and we actually do quite a bit of Reg D work in esoteric assets. So it is a long process. You have to commit to 6 to 12 months, and you have to do a lot of meetings before somebody writes the check. I guess the whole point about, getting a quick access to the market and getting capital also in the STO market is a pipe dream, right? But reality is, though, there are situations that it costs a lot actually to structure a Reg S and be able to go through a process of that the high net worth parties are able to actually allocate. Somebody in Zurich that manages $1 billion for a single family wants to allocate, then that essentially you may have to spend $300,000-400,000 to go to a Cayman and then blah 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 blah. So is STO solve that issue?
And so far, I don't think it solves that issue. I just don't.
So you still have to go through the same hoop in terms of getting a foreign investor in a U.S. based or otherwise.
Yeah, I think in general with the security token, I think as was said on some of the earlier panels, I mean it's still a securities offering. It's still subject to the same rules. It's a back end technology shift. It's not a solution to those sorts of hurdles.
Yeah, but there are jurisdictions that make it a lot easier,
Right.
like Cayman or.
Yeah, and there are jurisdictions outside the U.S. that do have much clearer rules on what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, and I think that's a huge advantage to thinking about some of those jurisdictions. The one thing I would caution people is that it's much harder to stay out of the crosshairs of the U.S. regulatory system than people think. I've certainly dealt with projects that went and formed in Cayman Islands, and all their investors are, through the Cayman entity, and so they are actually precluded, even if they're people in the U.S., from disclosing who the investors are, because that's Cayman information subject to Cayman privacy laws and the like. That is a slight speed bump to the SEC before the SEC just goes to the Cayman regulators, and all of a sudden you get an urgent request from the Cayman authorities to the Cayman entity, and the same information ends up back in the hands of the SEC anyway. And the SEC has a very broad view of its authority, as do other regulators here. They don't think there's much that's outside their territorial reach. I've litigated that issue with the SEC, and I can tell you their view of their authority is very expansive, and they will push hard on that, and they will be very hesitant to accept limitations there. If there's any conduct in the U.S. that's relevant, if there's any effects in the U.S. that's relevant, they're probably going to assume they have authority.
Ron, we're out of time. One question, maybe. Anybody have any question, maybe?
Yeah, please.
Does anybody have a question? I have a question. Lawyers, bankers, accountants, they're boring, but we need them. That's what I said.
Well, we're not boring. Come after 5 p.m.
We're going to have a next panel to go back to that Bitcoin and all this other stuff.
We become instantly liquid.
All right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very
Thanks
much,
so much.
Ron. We have your knowledge of it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Kayvan.
Yep, thank you.
Any of these people, Fintech World. Thank you.